Steve Bannon's podcast, War Room Pandemic, was one of the primary sources of this swirl. January 2nd, Eastman and Bannon questioned the courage and spine of Vice President Pence. Steve Bannon's podcast, The War Room Pandemic, was one of the primary sources of this swirl. Eastman was a guest on a January 2nd episode of Bannon's show. Much of their conversation focused on Vice President Pence and the belief that he had the power to overturn the election. This was annotation 114. Steve Bannon, War Room Pandemic Eastman episode.
Steve Bannon's criminal contempt trial is scheduled to begin on Monday. He faces contempt of Congress charges for failing to cooperate with the January 6th committee. The role that Bannon played in that day is part of a new special report airing Sunday night from CNN's Drew Griffin. Here's a preview.
Wrap your arms around Donald J. Trump.
Bannon threw his weight and power behind the Stop the Steal, then for a sweep. The plan called for workers' theory.
We need to bolster the authority of our leaders in Congress to not accept fraudulently certified slates of electors.
According to the...
Fuck. Does anybody have a link to that episode? God, fuck. Come on. Steve Bannon, War Room, Eastman. This episode has to be somewhere. Bannon's War Room, warroom.org. You're going to make me go all the way down. No shot. There's got to be an easier list of episodes, right? This can't be fucking real. Bro, he does like multiple episodes a day? Holy shit. Okay, War Room Eastman episode. Oh my God. Mina, I'm sorry, you're never winning this argument, my friend. Maybe on Spotify? Well, no, it's here. It's just... I have to scroll back through fucking... Wait, is there like a search on... Can I even play the full episode?
5.5 years ago, President inmates who complete the...
Bannon... Wait. Bannon's War Room, Apple Podcast, Eastman. Destiny, top right. Is it... This is... I don't think this is... This one? Maybe? But also, it looks like this is broadcast in video form somewhere as well, right? They showed that on CNN.
Virus has now killed more than 100.
The courts, the Supreme Court, Mike Pence, Pelosi and McConnell, everybody is just, I think, sitting there and they're turning and they're saying, hey, we read the Constitution, it says state legislatures. It's their problem. Well, it's 2 January, the year of our Lord 2021. I want to thank the guys in Denver, Real America's Voice, for really going overtime to put this on. Couldn't have a show yesterday because of difficulties in Denver, but we're here grinding it every day. One of the most important weeks, historic weeks in the nation's history. Going to culminate at least the first stage of it with an explosive 12-hour or more session in Congress on Wednesday. It looks like a massive rally happening. Donald J. Trump is going to actually speak to the people. I think he's saying it's going to be 11 o'clock on Wednesday. We're going to be covering all that. John Frederick's Radio Network, Real America's Voice. Up on the satellite dish, channel 219. On cable at Comcast channel 113. G News, GTV, and Mandarin throughout the world. We are on the streaming service. You can get us everywhere. And we're the number one, I think, conservative podcast in the nation. I believe as of last night we're behind Pod Save America. But remember, that's all they do is podcasts. We're ubiquitous. We're everywhere. Okay? Pack show. We got the 2020 War Room Man of the Year, Rudy Giuliani. We got John Eastman, the constitutional lawyer for the President of the United States. We got Mark Serrano, who's leading the effort over there at the Thomas More Society with Phil Klein to talk about what's going to happen. Liz Yore. We got a massive exclusive interview with Archbishop Vigano. It's going to come out on Monday. It's explosive. It's a throwdown, a war cry against the globalist elite and the apartheid meeting with the state legislatures to preview. We got Ian Smith, Slate Tours was packed. in the fight. I want to thank those folks, people that we couldn't get to it last week. We apologize. The folks that came out of Maricopa County, absolutely unbelievable. I think they had the county controller resigned. Didn't want to get involved in this fiasco in Maricopa County. The steal out there, they walked away from it. The attorney general then threw in and gave an amicus brief. So things are shifting. Today it's going to be a all hands meeting with the state legislators, state legislators that the Trump campaign and also others are putting on to explain this massive evidence of steal. You see Josh Hawley coming together. By the way, Mitch McConnell, not Steve Bannon, not Jeff.
Best and worst dinner for your waistline. Sweet potatoes. Try to find the purple sweet potato. They're the highest level of poly.
Don't boil or fry another egg.
Jesus Christ, guys. Don't boil or fry another egg. Hold on.
See, our bodies are nearly 20% protein. Protein is crucial for building muscles and bones. So eating protein in the morning provides the body the materials it needs to function all day long. Protein also keeps you full, boosting metabolism and calorie burning. So it's a fantastic way to promote healthy weight. However, not all protein affects the body the same way. The only way you'll be able to enjoy the incredible slimming and toning.
Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in
Thomas More Society with Phil Klein to talk about what's going to happen. Liz Yore, we got a massive exclusive interview with Archbishop campaign and Hawley electors about
Arizona.
This is the most important vote you will have in your career. Let me repeat that. This is a group of senators that voted on only the third time, Jack, in a trial of a sitting president for impeachment. They had an impeachment vote earlier in the year, and he's telling them, hey, what Paulie's trying to do is force, and they don't want to have it. He's trying to force what he said is the most important vote you will have ever. That is about these electors, about the Biden slate versus the Trump slate in these 6 states. It's a jam-packed weekend. This is one of the most historic weeks in American political history and American history overall. We're going to start with Boris Epstein from the campaign. So, Boris, lay out where we are, how we're going to get there. Are they going to be decertifying slates? Where does this fight go? Mike Pence kind of spit the bit, as we say. Louis Gohmert, we had him on the show the other day. I think it's a terrific lawsuit to say, hey, set aside the Electoral Count Act of 1877, and let's go right back to the Constitution. The VP's hardwired into the Constitution. And somehow the Vice President of the United States and President Trump's Department of Justice argued against that. So walk us through where we stand.
Steve, great morning to be with you. Thank you so much. Thanks to your listeners. Love those messages from the people in Arizona to you. And I'm getting them all the time on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, a ton of feedback, all positive about being on your show in the War Room, being the brain trust of Make America Great Again, brain trust of the MAGA movement. So here's where we stand. Last night, in an interesting decision, a federal district court did rule against the Louis Gohmert lawsuit, but only on standing. Only on standing, not on the merits. Again, using that standing doctrine, the same that the Supreme Court used against the Texas lawsuit, to punt on the issue. This time on the issue.
Fucking Rumble. Just as a real quick thing, people will say that standing doesn't matter. They'll say, oh, well, that was kicked out on standing. Fuck you. There are times when that's a legitimate argument. For instance, if somebody were to say, oh, this particular thing is definitely wrong, and then somebody goes, what do you mean that's wrong? And then somebody says, well, the court ruled that on the merits, the court ruled that this thing is wrong. And then somebody says, if in that case you look at the court case, like, well, actually they tossed us on standing because they said that these parties, didn't have standing to bring a case in front of a judge. That would be a good time to say, well, the standing isn't relevant. But in other times, standing is the merits in a way, right? So like for the Texas v. Pennsylvania case, to say that case was kind of like tossed on standing, the idea there isn't so much to say that Pennsylvania, ran their election acceptably or not. It's more to say that one state doesn't have a say in how another state runs their election. You have no standing there. And that's a really important concept. Standing is not just some irrelevant bullshit that, oh, it was standing, so it didn't actually matter. No, standing is important. You have to prove, and proving that you're an injured party, depending upon the type of suit, can be the most important part of a particular suit. Texas proving that they have an injury that they've suffered because of how Pennsylvania runs their election, it incorporates a whole bunch of like constitutional and state law theory and a whole bunch of stuff. Like that's arguably the most merit thing that you're kind of like looking at in that particular case. How does standing differ from jurisdiction? I believe that a jurisdiction just refers to a particular forum that has the authority or right to hear a case. I think jurisdiction refers to the court, the venue, the court that's hearing a case, and standing refers to the parties that could have a suit brought before a court. So, for instance, the court of the state of Pennsylvania wouldn't have the jurisdiction to hear a crime that was committed in the state of Florida. But that you're talking about the jurisdiction is what the court can hear, and then standing is going to be the parties that are hurt by a thing have to prove that they were hurt by a thing and that the court can provide relief for that thing. So that gives you standing, and that there's not like another blocker there. That gives you standing to bring a case. So parties have to have standing, and then they bring that standing to a court that has jurisdiction to hear a case, and then you suck everybody's dick or whatever.
Which is actually pretty clear, the wide, expansive, large amount of power that the vice president has in terms of counting the votes under the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, irrespective of what the Electoral Count Act says. So here's where we stand. In Georgia, a filing has been made in district court.
So I didn't read the underlying cases that Chesper was citing for this. So we've kind of brought this up before, but now that I have a better legal understanding of everything, I think I can kind of understand more what they're doing here. So we have a thing called the 12th Amendment, okay? For the 12th Amendment, the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom, at least, shall not be inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as vice president, and they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president, and of all persons voted for as vice president, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit, sealed with blah, 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 blah. Okay, direct to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, so this is the Vice President, shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for President shall be the President, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no such person has a majority, then from the person having the highest number of law. But in choosing the President, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. Let's see. Okay, but in choosing the president, the vote shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary for choice. If the House of Representatives shall not choose, the person having the greatest number of votes as vice president shall be the vice president. If such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have a majority, then from the two highest numbers on the list, the Senate shall choose the vice president. A quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice, but no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president. Okay, okay. One thing they invoke is the 12th Amendment, and then a second thing that they invoke is they try to say that the let's see. There's a law called the Electoral Count Act. Fuck, I'm not gonna be able to find this. Fuck, I wish I could point to this directly. I don't think anybody will get into this much into the weeds on the argument. But what it sounds like they were trying to do is they were trying to say the Electoral Count Act lays out the procedures that Congress ought to follow in order to resolve disputes if people are disagreeing about the slates of electors. But what Chesbrough was trying to argue, and then what Eastman ended up amplifying, was, well, actually, we think that the Electoral Count Act is actually unconstitutional. We think that it's unconstitutional because the Electoral Count Act dictates the way that Congress should act or that the Senate should act in rules that are not in accordance with ordinary Senate rules. And so what they were saying is Pence should step up and say, I'm going to do this constitutionally, meaning he's going to ignore how the Electoral Count Act says that you ought to conduct yourself, and then he can either recuse himself and have another president of the Senate come up and do it, which was part of the plan, or he could just say that when there's a dispute between like alternate slates of electors, he can say, well, ordinarily the vice president or the president of the Senate has the ability to like end debate and then toss it back to the House delegation. But it was some theory like this. If somebody wants to get into the weeds on this, I guess, well, we can read the ECA, and I doubt anybody will get that deep. But they were basically hinging on the Electoral Count Act, basically being able to say, we think that's unconstitutional, so we're going to act in a different way, and either people will challenge us, in which case, oh, well, fine, we'll go to the Supreme Court and fight it, or they won't challenge because it'll be mayhem, and then they can just try to get the vote certified for Trump. That was kind of like the esoteric. I just want to be clear. I don't have the fine details of that 100% down, but I have the broad strokes down. Just be aware of that, because people will say, oh no, like there was a legal theory for how this worked. Bullshit. That's fucking bullshit. There was no valid legal theory for how that works. When you say a legal theory, anything can be a legal theory, right? A legal theory can literally be whatever the fuck you want it to be, right? I could literally say we have a valid legal theory that allows us to fire a nuclear weapon at California. And that valid theory is that one of the first iterations of one of the first atomic bombs that we tested, the name of that bomb was freedom of speech. And in the First Amendment, Congress can't make a law abridging the freedom of speech, which is the name of our bomb, so we should be able to launch it. That's what I just said is a legal theory, just as valid as any other legal theory. Not really just as valid, but that's a legal theory. But that doesn't mean that it actually has any weight, right? That's a legal theory. None of what they were saying was tested in any court, was supported by any prominent or reputable legal scholar, and the Office of Legal Counsel and the legal counsel to the White House all said that this is not good. This is bullshit. You can't do this. This is not going to work, right? Just be clear of that when somebody says something, like, oh yeah, well they had a legal theory to make it work. Okay, and that doesn't mean anything. That's bullshit. Okay. That statement, well they had a theory, that doesn't carry any weight. Okay.
Or because the Georgia courts have refused to give President Trump and his campaign the due process which is allotted under Georgia law for an election contest. An election contest was filed over 3 weeks ago, and the Georgia court system has refused to even assign a judge to it. So now
wait, is Pisco in here?
We're taking that to the district court. The Pennsylvania case is in front of the Supreme Court, and now there are two Wisconsin cases, two Wisconsin petitions.
But hang on, hold on, slow down for a second. When you say in front of it, haven't the courts basically come back and said, hey, we see all these things, but either no standing or laches, or we just don't want to deal with it? In the Supreme Court.
I think we need to be careful when we speak of dual roles here. When you say a president's lawyer made it, no. A White House presidential lawyer did not make it. It was Donald Trump's personal counsel. These people, I don't believe any of these people, not Chesborough, I don't believe any of these people were White House staff. Eastman, I don't think. The Eastman was, and Giuliani and Powell, I don't believe any of these people were ever, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, you can look at that. I don't think any of these people were ever White House staff, ever. I'm pretty sure all of these people were just Donald Trump's campaign's lawyers or personal lawyers.
It's a perfect example. You had a great lawsuit. I think the most tightly argued you've had to date. John Eastman's going to be on next. And essentially, it's crickets, right? Because they're basically telling you, we don't want to deal with it. Is that what the audience should take away from this? Given all the evidence, all the...
Were the torture memos drafted under the Bush administration? Torture memos, Bush administration. You know what? If they were done by the OLC, then these would carry weight, but I don't know where these come from.
What's up, Holmes?
Okay, just real quick, okay? I want to rescind a statement I've said in the past, all right? I think that I don't support, I don't know if they would be criminal, but I think that every single senator that objected to the certification of the electoral vote, I think all of them are equally in the wrong for everything. When initially my defense of this, without having as deep an understanding of everything I do now, initially my defense was, well, there's a process by which you can challenge things, and I think that people should, if you want to carry out that challenge, I think you have every right to do so. However, the challenge for the certification of the vote, that wasn't like an authentic challenge. The forum of that challenge is to just make sure that the electoral votes were legitimately transmitted as they were supposed to be. That's it. There was no actual legitimate challenge there. It was just pissing and crying and moaning and wasting time without any authentic legal backing or like motivation to discover something or whatever legitimate. I think that was all bullshit.
Do you think that Congress has the power to substantively assess the qualifications of candidates or the validity of slates of electors?
Does Congress have the what? Say that again.
Authority. Do they have the power to
assess the validity?
Judge?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And so if you voted, sorry, let me back up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If Congress determines that the winner of the slates of electors, the lawfully appointed slates of electors, is ineligible to be president because they're 34, do they have the right to reject those votes?
I'm not sure.
That's a substantive authority if you say yes. if they're allowed to judge the qualifications of the candidates in a substantive way.
I thought it was just for the. I guess I'd have to read the actual ECA itself. Will the ECA lay this out what the purpose is, or is this going to be found in the? Is this a constitutional thing?
The amendments to the ECA. There's been a revision, which kind of clarifies it. You can look at it again though, and it kind of clarifies what Congress's roles are in terms of judging the vote for president. But you can imagine, right? Like, let's say that someone votes for president.
Actually, you know what? Well, I'm sorry. Maybe this is important for you establishing the next part of the question, but I would say that even if I agree with this, that's not what was happening on January 6th.
Yes, you could. You could say that, but I'm not. Oh, we're gonna get to the
Oh, sure.
stuff in a second.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Because all right, so think about this.
I guess what my answer would be is the specific text of the act. If they're my understanding was, and I'm saying this without having read the text, now I'm looking for the actual text of the ECA. My understanding is that it's just to certify the authenticity of the elector votes that were sent from the states. That it's
That's
not
kind
supposed
of like
to be
the procedural view
exactly.
of Congress.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that begs the question: what's procedure and what's substance? We can all have a long agreement of that, but that's kind of like a thing that we've developed somewhat over time in our jurisprudence. But think about the following situation: 370 electoral votes for chair. Just random fucking chair. Sure. Whatever, I don't have to explain why that happens because you're destined and you have to address the hypothetical. Can Congress be like, no, chair isn't a valid recipient of electoral votes, and so we're going to throw those away, and there is no majority, therefore it goes to the House delegations for precedent. Do you think they have that power?
I feel like I'm just going to be borrowing from Paulson and Ballard's paper about the Section 3 argument, and I would say that Congress does have remedies. It wouldn't be during the Electoral Vote Act, though. It would have to do with seating the actual president. So maybe by the ECA and that process, that procedure, you would have to seat chair as the president, but you could immediately file articles of impeachment, and the Senate would convict and remove immediately, or something like that. That would be the procedure for removal.
But here's a question. Like, in a way, when the Electoral College meets, the president's that's the binding vote. This is just counting.
Correct.
Right?
I believe so, yeah. If you think it's procedural, right? Yeah.
Right. Like, I guess the formalism of it, Congress is just counting the vote that has already happened. And so you saying they have to seat them, I guess, is the assumption there is that Congress seats them at all. And that Congress has but it sounds like what you're saying is you don't think there's a substantive role for Congress at all even if, for example, it's some absurd, say, for example, the candidate died, right? Say the candidate died between the Electoral College vote and when Congress receives them. Do you think that Congress is bound to have those votes count towards the dead person?
I would have to Google it. I'm sure there's been writing on this. What happens if somebody dies?
There's been one case, I think, in the 1800s where someone died and they discounted the electoral votes for president. I think that's one that Akhil Amar points to.
How did they discard the votes?
They just didn't count them, I think.
Okay.
And if you grant that, right? If Congress has any role in judging substantively, let's say.
Well, I think you would have to be really careful because, like, I think that I'm going to fight on context here. I could, because I feel like I could grant you, okay, sure, Congress can fight substantively for sure. However, the substance that Congress can fight over only exclusively applies to stuff on the federal level. So if there was like we'll say a constitutional prohibition of seating this person as president, maybe during the certification of the electoral vote, Congress could fight on those grounds. But Congress wouldn't have the right to fight on things that were a prior, it's not even a lower court, it would be a fundamentally different venue to fight on like the state stuff. Does that make sense?
Maybe, but isn't a violation, and this is kind of the argument from the state, from the state's perspective. Sure. I actually don't know if I agree with this, but a violation of state law, isn't that kind of a flavor of a constitutional issue? I mean, the states are allowed to make assign their electors, obviously, and the states are bound by their own state constitutions, as we know from the case Moore v. Harper.
Sure.
So isn't any act which they feel violates a state constitution violating the state's constitutional responsibility under Article 2 to assign their electors?
I don't know
or is
if
that just a state issue, you think?
I don't know if that sounds like, not only does that sound like a state issue, that sounds like a judicial issue. Like, I don't know why Congress would be reviewing the legality of a state. There's like two huge objections. One is, would they have review of the state's decision? And two, would they have a legal review of it? Because that's a legal challenge, right?
Yeah. So let me give you some, I'm going to stop asking questions and I'm going to start giving you what I think.
Sure.
I think that there are, some of these are good questions. I think there might be a substantive role for, and this hasn't obviously been tested. And to be honest, there's a professor, I think his last name's Foley. He identified that there's some of these issues in the 12th Amendment. It's not sometimes there are some lack of clarities in how this happens and what the role is. And that even with the reforms to the Electoral Count Act, there are some questions. And I think that's fair.
But I do, while that is fair, and while you could argue that maybe there could be a challenge to this and the Supreme Court would rule one way or another and you would have to change the language of the ECA or something else, while that might be fair, and while we might even imagine that maybe Congress, maybe we could even go as far as to imagine that Congress would have some sort of like state review or reviewing a state's decision on how they certify, possibly.
But even not the vice president.
Well, yeah, maybe that. But even if I granted you every single step of the way there, none of that, I don't think, would have reasonably been present on the certification of the vote day. Like, because what you're really asking at that point, to go all the way to their theory and the strongest and most best faith steelman version of their theory, what you're really asking is that when the Senate is confirming their electoral votes and they raise their objections, it's now on the senators themselves to consider the validity of the underlying court cases and how likely they are to proceed in a certain direction, and then to certify or not certify a vote from there, which I think leads to a million other horrible potential things, right? One of the underlying things for that Gen 6 stuff is that like a district court even ruled that it was obvious that that Eastman was filing cases just to further like the cases, right? That they were trying to disrupt the J6 committee, that they were filing cases to keep things alive. And the idea that the precedent now is like, well, if there's any active court case, maybe somebody in the Senate could object to an electoral college vote, and then we just like don't have a president, I guess. I just don't think any of that is done anywhere near good faith. Like whatever the exception we could imagine, like a dying president or everybody accidentally wrote the wrong name on the ballot and now a random guy is president, like the death note, it doesn't work or something, like something crazy like that. Or we find out like Joe Biden had a twin and now he's, like in that case, I can see like, okay, well, fuck, maybe it is time to visit like constitutional questions or ECA questions or whatever, but I don't think any of this was approached anywhere remotely in good faith.
Let me give you some clarity on some things. Well, first I'll raise a troubling concern. I think that given the court's precedent in Trump versus United States, there'd be a strong case for absolute immunity for congresspeople who are taking, supposing, of course, that it is a core power of congressional officials, that is, or I should say congressional members, senators and representatives, to have some level of substantive review over the electoral votes. And assuming that we both agree, and I think we do, that surely the vice president does not have a role here, and that is ceremonial. I think you and I agree on that.
I mean, you say ceremonial. I mean, there's like a procedure he has to follow, but he's not like making decisions, right? Yeah.
And to the extent he is, it would only be as president of the Senate.
Yeah.
In his legislative capacity as the head of the Senate, right? I think that there could be a strong argument for absolute immunity for those congresspeople. That's the kind of unsettling part. And I think there's a decent argument there. I don't know that it would be an immunity doctrine so much as it would be it's unconstitutional to apply this statute as to the congresspeople's decisions. I think that there's a pretty good argument there. And I think we have to think about that a little more. Here's where I don't think.
Well, that's why. To be fair, when I first started this, I said I don't know if I would say criminal or not, but definitely like scheming. These people were all scheming. I don't know if there would have been a crime here. Maybe in the farthest reaches of our imagination, we can imagine that maybe they even did have a right to do this and whatever. But I don't think any of it was done in any level of good faith. I'm like, oh, I'm just following my legal challenges.
Yeah. So here's why I think it ultimately doesn't matter so far as Trump is concerned. Number one, they weren't trying to get, they knew they didn't have the votes in Congress. That's why they were trying to go to the vice president to do shenanigans. And I think no reasonable lawyer, no reasonable scholar can say the vice president can unilaterally decide the course of elections, including the ones where he is standing in as a candidate. That would be saying essentially that Kamala Harris right now, as candidate or presumptive candidate for president, has the ultimate authority to decide her own election constitutionally in a way that you can't even amend through the Electoral Count Act. So I think most thinking people assume that we have a representative democracy and that's not allowed. And that's what they were trying to do. And so to the extent that you're onboarding these kind of congressional theories, I don't think it's super relevant.
No, I agree, but I can still have a different opinion about them.
Sure. I agree. You can have a different opinion. I think number two is we're not assessing the Congress people's liability. We're assessing Donald Trump's liability.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
It's one thing to say that Congress people may be immune. It's quite another to say a non-Congress person like Donald Trump or any of these cronies are immune. And so there are many reasons why I think these are interesting questions, troubling questions, but not necessarily ones that present themselves in the context of Trump's indictments and his efforts. And you were right on the money when you said some minutes ago that, like, the quote, it's a legal theory. Like, that's just a meme, right?
Yeah.
You can characterize or cast anything as a quote legal theory, and it's not a way to get rid of substantive liability. You could say that, I have a legal theory that president as commander in chief can order a military coup. I have a legal theory that the president, any of these crazy legal theories doesn't mean that you can take certain actions outside of the context of presenting a legal argument. No one is saying that you can charge Trump just for having a speech where he lays out the legal theory or going to court and presenting it. What we're charging him is for a conspiracy, a conspiracy to enact an illegal, illegitimate theory that has no basis. That's what he's being charged, or, hopefully.
And the idea that you can have a legal theory and that all of a sudden that can excuse all criminal culpability for an action.
No, that's simply nonsense. And remember, folks, at this point in time, all of the judicial challenges were over. We were past the safe harbor. And so the fake electors were not being used past the point of the safe harbor in any way to preserve legal rights or anything like that. That's just not the case. Query whether or not you would even need them to preserve anything. I think the court, if it found fraud, they would be able to fashion a remedy like courts do. And so I don't even think it would be necessary. But certainly past the point at which courts are no longer hearing challenges, you can't say that, well, the electors are still for the purpose that's expired, even assuming that were a valid purpose. They were being used for an invalid purpose, even assuming there would be a valid purpose to use them.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to speed through this before I have to leave for the night, so I love you. Be careful.
Yeah, later, dude.
Constitutional issues, everything. They're saying no mas. We just don't want to. We don't want to get involved in this.
What the Supreme Court is saying is that right now, you're right. They don't want to get involved. But what our perspective is, and what the fact is, that there are 46 electoral votes, and then you include Arizona with their 11. Then you go to 57 electoral votes, which are in contest right now in front of the United States Supreme Court, meaning petitions for certiorari, petitions for the court to take it up are pending. So there's no way to say that the election contests are over, election contests are not continuing, everything is decided. If you count the federal courts as being under the purview of the Supreme Court, which obviously they are,
but hang on. I want to,
which is the reason. Just let me finish real quick. Which is
your
the
Rudy's,
reason.
by the way. We got Eastman, the constitutional lawyer for the president, next. We got Rudy, the head lawyer. You're the deputy over there. I just got to ask this. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be one, right? I turn that over to you. I hire lawyers, right? So, isn't, and this is what the Pence suit is about, just to kind of boil it down to the essence of the thing itself. The courts, the Supreme Court, Mike Pence, Pelosi and McConnell, everybody is just, I think, sitting there and they're turning and they're saying, hey, we read the Constitution, it says state legislatures. It's their problem. And that's where the certification is. I think it's one of the reasons you're going to have this briefing today. In the state, Pennsylvania comes back Monday. There's a firestorm out in Arizona. When you boil it down, doesn't this get back to the state legislatures? They either certify the Biden slates or they don't. And if they don't, you have a contingent election, right? So isn't that the essence of it? And the courts are just going to take a Pasadena on this thing?
It's the legislatures in the states, no doubt about it. It's incumbent upon them in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Arizona, and I'll call out the ones which are Democrat controlled, in Nevada, in New Mexico, to do the right thing, by the American people, and have special sessions, continue investigating. The amount of fraud is absolutely staggering. We're talking about over 400,000 fraudulent ballots alleged in Georgia. We know for a fact from the recount in Wisconsin that just in Milwaukee-Dane County, I talk about this a lot, over 220,000 fraudulent ballots. We know the 700,000 ballots in Pennsylvania, which were mail-in absentee, which were not observed when they were being counted. We know that the number of around 200,000 more
Who's speaking right now? That's not Eastman, is it?
More votes cast than people who signed in to vote in Pennsylvania.
I think it's this Boris guy.
All this information is out there. All this information is
being
being presented, and these
Boris
state legislators
Epstein,
cannot stick their head in the sand and say this has nothing to do with us. You're right. The courts are saying it is incumbent upon them to act, and it is very clearly in the Article 2 of our Constitution spelled out that it is the duty and the job of the state legislatures to determine how elections are held, and it is their duty then to determine who the correct electors are. So that is absolutely irrefutable. Now,
what should our audience look for? Go ahead.
That the vice president has an extensive amount of power, and when it does come on the 6th, we already know that there's electors from both the Biden side and the Trump side that have been sent to Congress. That was done on December 14th. The vice president's got a lot of power, and that's very important to recognize. In this case for Lily Gohmert, dismissed only on standing, on procedure, not on merits.
That's a huge deal. Repeat that to the audience. I'll make sure everybody understands this. You got the very lead right there. Walk us through it again. We got about a minute.
The vice president has a ton of power in terms of opening and counting the electoral college votes at the joint session on the 6th. That power is enumerated in the 12th Amendment of the Constitution. The Louis Gohmert lawsuit, which wanted to have effectively declarative judgment highlighting that power, was dismissed yesterday in a lower federal court, but only on standing, only on procedure, not on the merits. The merits have not been adjudicated, which means the power stands.
Boris, give us your social media so that people can follow you during the day. And they got to follow you this week. You can dump Boris after Wednesday, but from between now and Wednesday, you got to be on the gram with Boris.
Well, it'd be nice if you kept me around. On the gram, Boris_Epstein, Boris_EPSHTEYN, putting out a ton of content in terms of what's happening, lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. Twitter @BorisEP, Parler @Boris. Instagram, Boris_Epstein, Twitter @BorisEP, Parler @Boris. God bless, rock and roll. We're going to have a huge, historic week for America.
Thank you, brother. Guy running 24/7. Remember, Madison Caulfield started this by saying he's in. On Monday, ladies and gentlemen, there was one. There was Mo Brooks, one man alone. CNN's in meltdown yesterday. There's 160 congressmen right now, and guess what? They're going to cross the 200 congressmen, I think, by Sunday. It's time for Minority Leader McCarthy to step up and say, I am Spartacus. Okay? Short break. We'll be back in a second.
Wow. War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Wow. War Room Pandemic.
Welcome back to War Room Pandemic. We're live from the nation's capital. It's 2 January. The year of our Lord 2021 just finished a historic year in 2020. Trust me, this is going to be big. We're going to John Eastman. We'll technically confirm getting John Eastman on, the constitutional lawyer for the president. Massive constitutional fights going on behind the scenes. People don't understand. President Trump did not return dramatically to the nation's capital in the White House with Melania and basically shine on his New Year's Eve party, which is kind of one of his pride and joys. To come back here and actually left early, come back in the morning to go through. And this is a fight. Okay, this is a fight. He was there to and look at the 100 names. We got to get those back up there in the House that helped override the President Trump's veto on the NDA. It was unacceptable. The 20 congressmen from yesterday, or senators from yesterday, Republicans that joined in to override President Trump's veto of the NDAA, and Marco Rubio, top of the list. Little Marco Rubio's done a good job on China. He's been there trying to get a little more populist. But now it's time to stand and deliver. This is a defining moment. This is what happens in 4 turnings. This is a defining moment. People will remember this one forever. It's where you were in this fight. Because here's what folks have to understand. We are inundated 24/7 with information and leads and new things. And one of the things we do, this is from Breitbart, you got to separate the wheat from the chaff, and you particularly,
dude, just
in this, ladies and gentlemen, is real. Between a really alliance between the EU and the CCP. Remember, it's 4 years ago. There are no conspiracies, but there are also no coincidences. This happening is going to have a major impact in your life, your children's life, your financial life. And we're going to have somebody from the new federal state of China on the second hour with Liz. Okay, turn now to one of the great thinkers about the Constitution and also a man of action. He's the president. Rudy Giuliani runs the overall. He's the president's lawyer, runs the overall operation over there. But John Eastman is the constitutional lawyer that's been putting up these lawsuits. John, first off, this argument of what's actually happened at the state basis and what happened in the Constitution that you and I happened to be on a call last night and you were walking people through, it was so brilliant. Could you just walk people through what the framework is for this week and why you?
Why would he green screen in the background like a Windows XP fucking window? What?
And you've been arguing in court and putting these briefings and these suits out there, that this is just outrageous that we're going down this path?
Sure. I mean, the U.S. Constitution very clearly assigns the power of selecting the manner for choosing electors to the legislatures of the state. For many years in our nation's history, the legislatures just picked the presidential electors themselves. But modernly, and for about the last century or century and a half in some cases, the legislatures have said we're going to do this by popular vote. But we're going to do it in accord with election laws that we pass. Election laws requiring signature verification on absentee ballots. Election laws require you to prove voter ID. All of those things designed to minimize the risk of fraud in how we conduct the election. And in a number of states, and most egregiously in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, partisan elected officials, and in some cases partisan judicial officials, ignored or altered those legislative commands and conducted the election in violation of the manner that the legislature had set out. That means the election was illegally conducted. And you don't even have to get into the number of ballots affected. It was illegally conducted. And I'll give you, I think, the most egregious example. In Georgia, they have a provision that if you have evidence of fraud or irregularities or evidence that a sufficient number of illegal ballots have been cast or legal ballots not properly counted, you can bring an election contest within 5 days after the conclusion of the recount. They did that on December 4th in Georgia. And here we are a month later, and we still don't even have a judge assigned to hear that case. And yet the governor went ahead 3 days after that challenge was brought and certified the electors, completely ignoring the statutory mechanism set out for resolving election disputes. And that means we have a failed election. And there's another.
It's not a green screen. It's software, or that, you know what I mean, the green screen software, where auto like masks your background and auto green screens your background. But I'm just saying like why this is a background.
In federal law, 3 United States Code Section 2, that says when the state has failed to choose electors on the date assigned by Congress, the power to choose the electors devolves back to the legislature because they have the ultimate constitutional authority here. And we got a lot of legislatures that are afraid to exercise that constitutional power because they think they have to get permission from the governor to have their session, or they got to get permission from the courts to do anything. No, this is a power the Constitution assigns exclusively to those state legislatures, and they need to act because what we have here is massive evidence that this election was at least conducted illegally, in violation of the state statutes, but lots of evidence as well that as a result of that illegal conduct, removing checks against fraud in the absentee ballot process, that we have absentee fraud more than enough to have affected the outcome of the election. And I think it's the duty of these legislatures to fix this egregious conduct and make sure that we're not putting in the White House some guy that didn't get elected.
This is what the constitutional crisis is. I want to be very specific and drill down this because this is going to be historic. We are entering into one of the most important constitutional crises the country's ever had. Your theory of the case, essentially, if they did give you an expedited hearing, if you went through all this process and you're filing other suits are just as powerful, at the end of the day, isn't what the Supreme Court's going to say? And look, I'm not a constitutional guy. Aren't they going to say, "Hey, John, great argument. We're not going to overturn the Biden electors. We're going to flip this whole thing back to the state legislatures, and they've got to either reaffirm, they've got to stand up. Isn't this all get back to the state legislatures, and particularly in these 5 states?
There are 2 places where it gets back to. It gets back to the state legislatures because their process was not followed, and it was deliberately not followed. This was a concerted effort to thwart the checks, the anti-fraud provisions they had put into place. So it devolved back to the state legislature. And the only other place where it devolves back to is the Congress, and particularly the vice president, who will sit in presiding over a joint session of Congress beginning January 6th to count the ballots. And they got multiple slates of ballots from 7 states, and they've got to decide which is the valid slate to count. I think they have that authority to make that determination on their own, but it would certainly be helped immensely if the legislatures in the states look at what happened in their own states and weigh in, exercising their power under the U.S. Constitution. And here's the biggest problem: we haven't had this happen. There was one minor event in 1960 out of Hawaii, but we haven't had it happen on the scale that we have now with multiple slates from multiple states since 1876. They don't understand that the power they have to exercise here is not derived from their state constitution. It's derived from the federal constitution. So restrictions on that power, like we can only meet with the permission of the governor of our state, restrictions on that power are preempted by the federal constitution. They have this power directly from the federal constitution. And it's there for a reason, because it's much easier to corrupt a single executive official than it was to corrupt the entire legislature to have an outcome. And they wanted the branch of government closest to the people, which is the legislature, to be the one that has the ultimate say about here. And these guys need to understand their constitutional authority and their constitutional duty to put a stop to this egregious violation of law that has occurred.
The Louis Gohmert suit is essentially saying that the Electoral Count Act of 1877 is unconstitutional. You got to go back to the Constitution, and there, the President of the Senate, the Vice President of the United States, is hardwired in, and he's actually a decision maker. This is not ministerial. Is that correct? And last night, the ruling was so important because the judge didn't want to touch the merits, right? It's once again, you got no standing. Are we to assume that this is going to be a climactic battle that's going to take place this week about the very question of the constitutionality of the Electoral Count Act of 1877?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the courage and the spine of the individuals involved. But look, I love Representative Gohmert. I think he's terrific.
Can we ask you to stay through the commercial break and bring you back?
Sure.
I know you're slightly swamped, but here's the reason. When you just said the courage and the spine, we know Louis Gohmert's got all the. He's pure honey badger. Judge Gohmert from down Texas 1. That guy is tough as Texas boot leather. Okay. Are you talking on the other side of football? Would you be? That'd be a nice way to say a guy named Vice President Mike Pence.
Yes.
I don't put you on the spot like that, John. You're too good a man. John Eastman, one of the most decent guys I've ever met. So, we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll return with the president's constitutional lawyer, John Eastman. Also going to bring in his personal lawyer and the guy running the entire thing, War Room's 2020 Man of the Year, Rudy Giuliani. All next on the other side of this commercial break with Jack Maxey, Stephen K. Bannon, live from the nation's capital. We'll return in a moment.
Wow.
War Room. Republicans that joined in. Too. Okay. Are you hours, 2 hours per state on showing? So, John,
if you're in Georgia or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Arizona, call your legislatures, demand that they call themselves into session, which they have the constitutional authority to do. No restriction in their constitution telling them they can't exercise this power is valid. It's preempted by the federal constitution. There's a little thing in the federal constitution called the supremacy clause, and it says the laws and Constitution of the United States are the supreme law of the land. Nothing in the state laws or state constitutions to the contrary notwithstanding. It cannot be more clear here. And pressure needs to be brought on these recalcitrant legislators to call themselves into session and to make an assessment of what happened in their state, and then either decertify the existing slate of electors if there's just too much uncertainty about the results of the election, or certify the correct slate of electors if the number of ballots that are shifted, if you get rid of the illegal ones, are enough to affect the outcome as we believe they are. They need to do that this week before Wednesday. So pressure beginning now, and rolling thunder pressure. If you find one guy saying, well, I can't do anything, the leader is the one blocking it, then shift the focus to the leader. The second thing that needs to happen is, I think what's going to happen or should happen in Congress is we can't count slates of electors that were illegally certified. And if they were certified after an election that violated fundamental state law, those are illegally certified. If you or I were to submit a bank mortgage application to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac that had that kind of misrepresentation on it, we would be in prison. So we need to bolster the authority of our leaders in Congress to not accept fraudulently certified slates of electors.
Okay, we're going to be putting that up from Denver in a moment. Just hang on there. Okay, one last question. Is the president's best path to affirm his victory on November 3rd hang on getting a contingent election here in the House of Representatives? Or is there a way, an alternative way, that you see the power through this, using either the Electoral Control Act or some decision that made that the Vice President of the United States grows a spine and understands his constitutional duty as you interpret it, Mr. Eastman?
Yeah, so look, we've got cert petitions pending in the Supreme Court on this very question from Pennsylvania and Georgia. A new case was filed New Year's Eve from Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And a new case...
Bro, you want to talk about lawfare? Jesus.
...was filed New Year's Eve in Georgia, raising the same thing. The states ignored their state election law, and those slates of electors are invalid.
Amazing, they're still trying the script. No.
I think the Vice President, as presiding
years old. This is a 3-year-old video.
...over the joint session, would at least agree that because those ongoing contests have not been resolved...
What's a contingent election hearing? When he talks about contingent election, I think he's talking about that. If there's no clear winner picked after the certification of the votes, then it gets thrown to the House delegation to vote on president. I think that's the contingent election he's talking about, I think.
Can't count those electors. That means that nobody has a majority of the electors, and either they delay things so those constitutional challenges are resolved, or they say, okay, well, we don't have electors from those states. Nobody has a majority. This is going to the House.
This is going to the House. When he says going to the House, that means going to the House delegation. So each state gets one vote for a president, basically.
Either route requires that we look at what actually happened here and get to the bottom of it. This is about more than who wins this particular race. We no longer have a self-governing republic if the election.
Could you explain why one state cannot experience injury for how another state selects its electors? Because you don't have a right. A state doesn't have any right to choose or to tell another state how to choose their electors.
That we participate in are meaningless because of fraud, and that's the stakes. Are we going to be a self-governing republic or are we not? Those are the stakes, and it's much bigger than whether President Biden or President Trump gets sworn into office on January 20th. This goes to the heart of whether we're a Republican form of government and whether we get to control the direction of our government or not.
This is why Mitch McConnell said the other day when he got on a conference, he told these guys who had just voted 9 months before, only the third time in the history of the Republic, at a trial to impeach a president, told them this will be the most important vote you ever take. John Eastman, how do people get your social media so they can follow you during the day, sir?
Dr. John Eastman at Twitter and John Eastman at Parler.
You're a good man, sir. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you, Steve. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I want to bring in now the War Room's 2020 Man of the Year, Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor. Mayor Giuliani, I got to go to the cut right to the chase. You've been obsessed with one thing, as I've known you as a friend, a colleague, and somebody working on this for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And it goes off of what John Eastman just said. It's about the responsibility. Not simply the constitutional responsibility, but the moral responsibility of the state legislatures who never signed up. They understand they never signed up for this because we never thought about it. But right now, Eastman frames it perfectly, and even Mitch McConnell said the quiet part out loud last week. This is more important than, and Trump understands this. This is more important than November 3rd. This is more important than even Trump's presidency, as it confirmed his victory. This is more important than this fight between the nationalists and the globalists. This is more important than the fight between progressives and conservatives. It's more important than this fight between Republicans and Democrats. This gets to the heart. If you go read Roman history, this is like towards how the Republic fell, right, and became a totalitarian authoritarian empire. We're at that moment, and that's what this week is. And Mayor Giuliani, you have been obsessed with the responsibilities of the state legislature and what they can't do, which is to essentially break the law and send this forward. Will you explain to our audience the details on what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is the founding fathers figured out where to point the finger of responsibility, and the buck stops with the state legislatures. It's right in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. It may be that we didn't pay that much attention to it in the past because we haven't, but it's been there from the beginning, and it makes clear that it's their responsibility. And when they took an oath of office, they all took an oath of office to uphold that Constitution, including that clause. The founders even anticipated a close, difficult, and contested election, and they made a deliberate choice to give it to the legislators closest to the people. Now, I believe, and I don't think I'm far off, I think most people understand this election will be scrutinized for years, maybe for many years. This could be the most historic vote they cast. It certainly is going to probably be the most scrutinized in terms of their political careers, their personal lives, and what we think of them as men and women of integrity. And if you just focus on it, they are being asked now to sit by and watch a fraud get perpetrated in the name of their state. This is before we get to whether Trump won. What we know is the vote count is substantially wrong. We know that in each one of those states, and I go through each one, I'll pick just one, Arizona. We know in Arizona that illegal immigrants, people without citizenship, voted. That is not considered in the vote count of Arizona. 32,000 at least, determined by not the best sources. We got to go to newspapers and records, but they're all for sure illegal. So we got to deduct 32,000 from his vote count. Same thing with, dead people can't vote. Well, 8,000 of them voted in Arizona, and they're counted. We call that a fraud. They submitted a statement to the government, and that statement is a false statement. They have to take responsibility for that, for good or for bad. They can't get away with it by saying, oh, it's too complicated, I didn't understand I had those responsibilities, and I don't think history is going to let them get away with it. So I have to impress on them, I hope, over the next couple of days, and no one does it better than Professor Eastman, that this is a decision with great consequences. It also is, as you point out, we've had a terrible year for human rights and civil rights. We've had our freedom of speech trampled. We've had our freedom of religion attacked terribly. We've had our freedom of movement virtually taken away from us. You look at those three things, and it's starting to look like East Germany before the fall of the wall. And now,
but hang on a second. I want to get to this. Yeah, but here's one of the points I want you to address. The audience that's worked so hard, and this is the most powerful audience in all media because we have activists that'll go do it and they'll burn down the phone lines. They're saying they're like in a Kafkaesque novel. They're looking and saying, hey, we got Eastman and Rudy. We got Trump, and they're making this argument. They got the receipts, they got the evidence in every vertical, in the illegal, the voter fraud vertical, the ballot fraud vertical, the election fraud vertical, the no chain of custody, the mailing, and that's even before. Let's leave off to the side Dominion, which is going to take longer in real investigations from law enforcement. But that's a free option. That's huge too. But that's for another day. You got all this, which are hundreds of thousands. And these are Republican-controlled legislatures. The disconnect is, Mayor, how when evidence is that overwhelming, when their constitutional duties are so specific, how do you have guys running around telling them you have no power, you just have to take a pass on this and let it just play out the way it's going to play out? How did they have these
Were these lawyers disbarred over this shit? I don't know who all got disbarred. Trump lawyers disbarred. Who all got disbarred? I think Giuliani did, didn't he? Giuliani was formally disbarred in New York. Here are all the other ex-Trump lawyers now facing legal consequences. I think Chesbro must have gotten, right? Maybe? Okay, Troupis. Wait, sorry, hold on. Chesbro, the attorney. This is the guy who made who created this. Took a plea deal. Okay, maybe he didn't get disbarred. James Troupis was the guy that was talking back and forth that we saw in all those texts to Chesbro with the emojis. Jenna Ellis is related to. It's from Colorado, maybe. We have Eastman. He was charged in Arizona and is indicted in Georgia. California State Bar. Judge recommended in March that he be disbarred. Christina Bobb was reportedly charged in Arizona. Oh, Clark got charged. Damn. DC Ethics Committee found in a preliminary ruling. Sanitation Disbarment. Sidney Powell. A judge dismissed an attempt by the Texas State Bar to discipline Powell in February. Now faces separate disciplinary investigation in Michigan. Oh, and she's facing defamation lawsuits from Dominion and Smartmatic. I think Dominion still has a couple of those that are about to. This is all unhinged. Jesus Christ.
They're telling them that.
Well, this is why this election is bigger than Donald Trump, Joe Biden, you, me, or any of us, because this is a this is a pernicious scheme by the Democrat Party to steal this election. It's only going to happen again. It's certified. Donald Trump and the people blocking it right now are people like Speaker Ralston, who is a good man, but somehow he's got himself hung up on whether he can call a special session or not. He can't possibly have himself hung up on fraudulent that show fraud. Trump, I can demonstrate that Trump won the state by 80 or 90,000 votes at a minimum. He knows all that. He's a smart man. But he's all hung up on, can we call a special session? And that's where Professor Eastman is so important, because he explains that you have that right by virtue of the fact that this is a special power you have given to you by the United States Constitution. And it is true that some of them have had a hard time believing that, accepting it. It's a little bit like, I'm just a state representative. You mean I get to choose the president? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, you do. Our founding fathers put the finger of responsibility on you. You did a good job.
Mayor, could you hang over just to a commercial break? I've got a couple more questions. Okay. Mayor, really, Julian, and did...
Pandemic.
Okay.
If you look at people like Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and gosh, I mean, they are as skilled as some of the finest trial lawyers. And Hawley's stepping forward. I guess he's the youngest man.
Tree.
What is this?
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? It is. I'm not gonna lie. It is funny. Like, they have a better meme game than Trump. The Trump campaign's meme game sucks. Absolutely sucks. And you know what? Somebody was telling me this, and he's right. Kamala has adopted Brat. She's Brat now. She adopted the Charlie XCX album. If Trump was smart, he would have adopted the Yeet album. He would have adopted the whole Yeet aesthetic or something like that. Vultures, Yeet. They would have done something similar. Big problem with the GOP is that they're all so fucking lame. They are lame.
Oh, he's so ass mad about getting cast out by Yay, I bet.
Trump was the only cool one. Now he's like kind of a dork. You can't actually turn your nose up and say, rap music? That's for black people. Oh, you listen to that? That's for faggots. Like, you actually have to be high in openness to be creative. But yeah, Kamala should not be underestimated. W Brat. W Brat Summer, W Coconut. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context.
Okay. Okay. You're in Moist Critical's newest video. Boom, 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 boom.
You see how you want to answer the question? You see how he's going to yap and not answer the...
Oh, I'm good on this. Jesus. Fuck, this is taking a while. Okay. Keep doing it tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll go over definitions of insurrection 2, and then on Thursday I think we have a debate with Andrew Wilson about this, or a workshop, a debate. I love you guys. It's been fun. See you tomorrow. Representative Cappuccino, 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 Cappuccino. Am I doing it? I'll catch you guys next. Stream it on. Be careful.